In 1999, the American live sound ecosystem, a back-breaking architecture of heavy wooden cabinets and standalone power amplifiers, was suddenly threatened by a single piece of molded blue-gray plastic from Woodinville, Washington. It was called the Mackie SRM450. It cost roughly $700, weighed just 51 pounds, and hid its own amplifiers inside an asymmetrical shell. Within a year, Guitar Center floors across the country were overwhelmed by musicians trading in their passive systems for a plastic box they could carry with one hand. Working musicians, mobile DJs, and church volunteers no longer needed a cargo van for a local gig. The heavy power amplifier quietly began to disappear from the trunks of American sedans. The paradox was that it did not look like a serious audio tool. To veteran sound engineers, it looked like a toy. Yet, plugged into a mixer at a VFW hall, it produced a physical volume that humiliated traditional wooden cabinets. But the real story of the Mackie SRM450 is not just how a plastic speaker made the amplifier rack obsolete. It is the story of an American brand that established an industry standard only to fall victim to the corporate consolidation and offshore manufacturing that eventually eroded the trust inside the cabinet. America built the stage, engineers built the sound, the market changed the rules. Every week we tell the stories of the American speaker brands, factories, and listening cultures that shaped how people heard music, and what happened when those forces collided. Subscribe if that history matters to you. The story begins not with nostalgia, but with a specific place, in Woodinville, Washington in 1989. Before 1999, the American working musician faced a punishing physical reality. To play a local bar, a high school gymnasium, a church basement, or a weekend wedding, a band did not just have to know their music, they had to operate as a moving company. The live sound landscape was dominated by passive speakers. A passive speaker, a loudspeaker that requires a separate external amplifier to power it, was almost universally built from heavy plywood or MDF. Wood was trusted. Wood provided the acoustic rigidity that gave a woofer, a large driver designed to reproduce low frequencies such as bass and drums, the physical support it needed to push air into a crowded room without shaking itself apart. But wooden cabinets were only half the burden. Because the speakers were passive, the power had to come from somewhere else. That meant the amplifier rack. A standard gigging setup required a heavy wooden or plastic road case housing separate power amplifiers, graphic equalizers, and external crossover networks. A crossover, an electrical network that sends bass to the woofer and treble to the tweeter, was a crucial piece of mathematics that the user often had to calculate themselves. Setting up a PA system, a public address setup designed to project sound to a crowd, meant running thick, heavy copper speaker cables from the stage back to the amplifier rack. It meant calculating impedance, the electrical resistance a speaker presents to an amplifier, in the dark, hoping the wiring was correct so the amplifier would not overheat and shut down mid-song. For the American bar band, the mobile DJ, and the local sound engineer, the equipment dictated the scale of the performance. If you wanted louder sound, you needed heavier cabinets and heavier amplifiers. A typical local rig could easily weigh 300 pounds. It required a cargo van, a hand truck, and at least 2 people to lift the top boxes onto metal speaker stands. This was the American absence. The market had power, and the market had fidelity, but the market lacked freedom. 2,000 miles away from the established audio manufacturing hubs of Los Angeles and Hope, Arkansas, a company in Woodinville, Washington, was watching this struggle. Greg Mackie had founded Mackie Designs in 1989. He had already transformed the American recording studio by introducing affordable, high-quality, compact mixers that allowed musicians to capture clean audio without booking expensive commercial studio time. His philosophy was rooted in democratic engineering, high performance, aggressive pricing, and equipment that could survive being thrown into the trunk of a car. But by the late 1990s, Mackie looked beyond the studio console. He saw the floors of American instrument retailers like Guitar Center and Sam Ash dominated by the same heavy, cumbersome PA systems that had been sold for a decade. He recognized that the American working musician did not want to be a heavy-lifting roadie or an electrical engineer calibrating amplifiers in a dark VFW hall. The musician just wanted to plug in and play. To solve this, the amplifier could no longer live in the heavy rack by the mixing board. It had to live inside the speaker cabinet itself. But Greg Mackie faced a fundamental manufacturing problem. Mackie Designs built mixing consoles in Woodinville. They did not build raw speaker drivers, and they certainly did not build the rugged, high-excursion woofers required to survive a live American gig. To put an amplifier inside a cabinet, the cabinet could not simply be a standard wooden box with a heavy metal heatsink screwed to the back. The internal vibration would destroy the electronics, and the extra weight would defeat the entire purpose. It had to be engineered from the ground up as a single integrated system. In 1998, Mackie made a strategic move that would alter the trajectory of American live sound. The company acquired RCF, a highly respected Italian acoustic engineering firm. Possessed the tooling and experience to design precision cast frame woofers and titanium compression drivers, a high-efficiency tweeter that pushes sound through a small opening to project it forward. But Mackie did not want to merely import European speakers. They wanted to take Italian acoustic engineering and package it into a highly durable, foolproof form factor, specifically designed for the American retail floor and the American car trunk. The result was the Sound Reinforcement Monitor, or SRM. When the Mackie SRM450 officially debuted in 1999, it did not look like anything else sitting on the floor of a Sam Ash or Guitar Center. It was housed in a high-impact composite plastic shell, molded in an asymmetrical shape that allowed it to stand upright on a metal pole or lay on its side as an angled floor monitor. At roughly $700 per cabinet, the economic reality immediately shifted for the American gigging musician. Buying a pair of SRM450s cost around $1,400. To achieve a similar volume and clarity with a traditional rig, a band had to buy 2 passive wooden cabinets, a separate heavy solid-state power amplifier, an external crossover unit, and thick-gauge speaker cables, often spending well over $2,000, while accepting the physical labor of carrying 300 pounds of gear. The Mackie weighed exactly 51 pounds. Early reception into the American audio market was a volatile mix of deep skepticism and immediate conversion. Veteran sound engineers, accustomed to the acoustic damping properties of heavy birch plywood, looked at the blue-gray plastic shell and assumed it would rattle, distort, or physically melt. Under the stress of a loud 4-hour bar gig, they trusted mass. Plastic felt like a toy. But mobile DJs, a rapidly growing demographic in the late 1990s American event industry, were the first aggressive adopters. A working DJ could suddenly fit an entire high-fidelity playback system into the back seat of a compact car, walk into a venue, plug a mixer directly into the back of the speaker, using a standard microphone cable, and start the show. Small churches realized they no longer needed a dedicated sound booth filled with amplifier racks. They could simply mount 2 plastic speakers on the wall. By the year 2000, the SRM450 was featured prominently in national musician catalogs like Musician's Friend. It was pitched not just as a loudspeaker, but as a complete, self-contained PA system. The catalog pages emphasized the built-in amplification, assuring buyers that the plastic box was as durable as the wooden cabinets it was built to replace. The engineers in Woodinville had successfully solved the weight, the power, and the price. But they still had to convince the broader American working musician to fully trust a speaker cabinet that was made of plastic. Walking into an American stereo store or a big box instrument retailer in the year 2000 meant navigating a maze of black carpet, heavy wood, and exposed steel. The live sound department at a typical Guitar Center or Sam Ash was a fortress of passive speaker cabinets stacked chest high, flanked by racks of heavy power amplifiers and thick copper cables. But sitting on a tripod stand, completely unattached to the heavy racks, was the Mackie SRM450. To the American listener, the physical presentation of the speaker was instantly jarring. It did not have a flat wooden top to set a drink on. Its cabinet, the composite plastic box that holds the drivers and shapes how the speaker interacts with the air, was molded into an asymmetrical trapezoid. This odd shape was not a cosmetic choice. It was engineered so the speaker could stand upright on a pole for a crowd or lie on its angled side to serve as a floor monitor for a vocalist. Turning the speaker around revealed what truly made it a threat to the old American audio ecosystem. There were no traditional quarter-inch speaker jacks. There were no heavy binding posts. Instead, the rear panel featured a massive cast aluminum heatsink, a standard IEC power cord receptacle, and a single balanced XLR input. The musician did not plug a heavy amplifier cable into the Mackie. They simply plugged the speaker into a wall outlet and ran a microphone cable directly from their mixing board. The breakthrough was a concept called bi-amplification. In a traditional passive speaker, an external amplifier sends a massive, full-range electrical signal down the cable into the wooden cabinet. Inside the cabinet, a passive crossover, a network of heavy copper coils and capacitors, physically forces the high frequencies to the tweeter and the low frequencies to the woofer, wasting a massive amount of power as heat in the process. The SRM450 eliminated that waste. It was an active speaker, a design where the electronics are perfectly matched to the drivers inside the box. When the audio signal entered the back of the Mackie, it first hit an active crossover, an electronic filter that divides the sound at a low voltage level. Before it ever reaches an amplifier, the low bass frequencies were routed to a dedicated 300-watt internal amplifier. The high treble frequencies were routed to a completely separate 100-watt internal amplifier. Because the amplifiers were directly connected to the internal drivers, there was no power lost to copper speaker wire. The woofer, the large driver pushing the heavy bass notes, was a 12-inch RCF precision transducer, armed with a massive magnet structure to handle the 300 watts of immediate power. The tweeter, a titanium compression driver designed to fire high frequencies through a molded horn to cut through a noisy room, received its own isolated power. If a heavy bass drum hit distorted the woofer amplifier, the vocal coming through the tweeter remained perfectly clear because the two amplifiers operated independently. But Mackie and RCF went further, addressing a problem that had plagued live American audio for decades: phase cancellation. Because a woofer is physically deeper than a tweeter, the high frequencies in a traditional cabinet reach the listener's ear a fraction of a millisecond before the low frequencies, causing a subtle smearing of the sound. The SRM450 utilized electronic time alignment, a processing delay applied to the high frequencies so that the highs and lows hit the listener into the exact same physical instant. The result was a stereo image and a mid-range clarity that rivaled expensive studio monitors, but delivered at a volume that could easily fill a 300-person American venue. This engineering created an impenetrable moat around the product. Competitors could mold a plastic box, but they could not easily replicate the acoustic synergy between the Italian drivers and the American active electronics. More importantly, Mackie made the system foolproof. The internal circuitry featured active limiters, electronic safeguards that automatically reduced the volume if a DJ pushed the mixer too hard, preventing the voice coil from melting. A yellow light on its back simply blinked to warn the user, but the music never stopped. You could not easily blow up a Mackie SRM450. The American price context accelerated the takeover. A single SRM450 retailed for roughly $700. A working duo could purchase a pair for $1,400. To match that power, clarity, and driver protection using a passive system, an American band would have to spend a minimum of $2,000. Buying a heavy Crown or QSC power amplifier, a pair of heavy JBL or Yamaha passive wooden cabinets, an external crossover, and a heavy road case to hold the electronics. The economic choice was obvious, and the distribution breakthrough happened almost overnight. Salesmen at the floor of a Guitar Center in Chicago or a Sam Ash in New York did not have to explain time alignment or buy amplification. They simply plugged a portable CD player directly into the back of a single SRM450, turned the volume knob to the middle, and watched the customer step back in shock at the sheer physical force of the bass. The speaker was rapidly adopted by the critical arteries of the American working music scene. Mobile wedding DJs in New Jersey traded in their heavy racks for the blue-gray cabinets. Local VFW halls in the Midwest replaced their blown-out ceiling speakers with a pair of Mackies on tripods. High school auditoriums, regional chapters of the American Federation of Musicians, independent equipment rental houses, and the massive direct mail catalogs of Sweetwater Sound standardized the SRM450 as the default solution for anyone who needed professional volume without a professional crew. The room did not care that the cabinet was made of plastic. The audience only cared that the vocals were clear and the bass was heavy. The badge on the grill was not just a brand. It was a license to gig anywhere, without a truck. By the year 2002, the Mackie SRM450 was no longer merely a successful new product sitting on the floor of an American instrument retailer. It had become the physical infrastructure of the American working gig. The asymmetrical blue-gray cabinet was visible in nearly every corner of the live sound ecosystem, establishing a dominance that completely erased the old rules of public address. Los Angeles built the Wanatidikas Iwaranese, the Hollywood Cinema Systems. Hope, Arkansas, built the Kiki-Iziowon. Look at the corner horn for the living room. Framingham, Massachusetts sold reflected sound to the middle class. But Woodinville, Washington built the blue plastic box that powered the American weekend. The scale of adoption was unprecedented for an active plastic loudspeaker. The American Federation of Musicians saw its local chapters recommending the SRM450 to gigging members as a way to save their backs and their wallets. Mobile wedding DJs in New Jersey bought them by the pair, realizing that they could charge the same premium rate for a reception while carrying exactly half the weight. VFW halls across the Midwest unbolted their blown-out, decades-old ceiling PA horns and mounted Mackies directly on the walls. Small church sanctuaries in Texas cleared out their amplifier closets completely, replacing heavy heat-generating racks with two self-powered cabinets suspended above the congregation. Independent audio rental houses in Chicago and Atlanta bought pallets of the speakers. They knew the active limiters inside the Mackie made them virtually impossible for a careless renter to destroy. The massive direct mail catalogs of Sweetwater Sound and Musician's Friend featured the SRM450 as the default centerfold solution for live sound. It was a cultural moment that redefined the economics of playing live music in America. For decades, the barrier to entry for a serious performing band was the prohibitive cost and immense weight of the PA system. The Mackie removed that barrier entirely. A garage band in Seattle or a high school auditorium in California no longer needed a dedicated sound engineer to balance crossovers, calibrate power amplifiers, and monitor impedance loads. They only needed a standard power outlet and a microphone cable. In a crowded American bar where a cheap, underpowered PA system could make a vocalist sound buried and unintelligible under the crash of cymbals, the right speaker could cut through the noise, throwing a clear, time-aligned vocal directly to the back wall, powerful enough for the audience to believe the room had changed shape. At its peak, Mackie was manufacturing and moving tens of thousands of units per month. The factory partnership with RCF in Italy was running at maximum capacity, casting thick aluminum heat sinks, winding precision voice coils, and molding the heavy composite plastic shells that would be loaded into shipping containers bound for American retail floors. The version 1 of the SRM450, the model proudly bearing the Made in Italy or Assembled in USA with Italian Parts designation on the heavy metal backplate, became a highly coveted badge of reliability. The physical presence of the speaker was unmistakable. It was a blue-gray trapezoid sitting on a heavy black aluminum tripod stand, a single green power LED glowing on the back panel, its heavy perforated metal grille protecting the Italian woofer and titanium compression driver from spilled beer, microphone stands, and the brutal reality of the American road. The cabinet would become scratched, the plastic would become scuffed, the grille would suffer road rash, but it never stopped working. The built-in handles were perfectly balanced for a single human hand. The heatsink on the back would run hot to the touch after a 4-hour set, silently dissipating the heat of 300 watts of bass energy. But the yellow thermal warning light almost never came on. Every weekend, every bar, every working band, the speaker had become invisible by being absolutely everywhere. The dominance of the Mackie SRM450 was not merely an accident of timing or aggressive marketing. It was the result of a perfectly aligned American audio ecosystem. The manufacturer, the retailer, and the listener were all in absolute agreement that the old way of doing things was dead. To understand the immense scale of this victory, one must look at the specific American listening communities that adopted the Blue Cabinet as their definitive voice. It was not just the rock band in the suburban garage. It was the electronic music underground in Detroit, where DJs needed deep, sustained bass reproduction that would not melt a voice coil after 6 hours of continuous, punishing playback. It was the acoustic folk duo playing a noisy, packed coffeehouse in Austin, Texas, who needed the titanium tweeter to slice through the chatter with absolute vocal clarity. It was the corporate event production companies in Las Vegas, who bought hundreds of cabinets at a time because the asymmetrical shape allowed them to be hidden easily as low-profile floor monitors on large convention stages. At the very center of this ecosystem was the Guitar Center retail machine. The SRM450 was arguably the most profitable, most easily demonstrated, and most frequently recommended piece of live sound equipment on the entire sales floor. Salesmen loved the product because it required no complex, multi-component explanation. It was a self-contained, foolproof solution. A customer walked in with a fundamental problem. They needed to be louder, and walked out with 2 boxes that solved the problem instantly. Mackie's peak metric during this era was not just the sheer volume of unit sales, though they were easily moving unprecedented numbers for a professional audio product. The true metric of their scale was complete cultural visibility. Every local music festival, every summer block party, every hotel ballroom corporate retreat, and every small club stage featured the distinctive blue-gray profile. The physical design was so iconic and so ubiquitous that it became a visual shorthand for live music itself. If you saw the Mackie speakers elevated on tripod stands, you knew a show was about to happen. In an American basement or rehearsal space, a pair of SRM450s became a definitive status symbol for the serious amateur musician. It proved they were ready for the road. The cabinets were heavy enough to feel like serious equipment, but light enough to throw in the back of a Honda Civic at 2 in the morning after an exhausting gig. The physical ritual of using the speaker inspired deep confidence. The heavy power cord clicked into the back with a reassuring solidity. The single switch activated the internal amplifiers with a quiet, authoritative thump. The green light signaled it was ready for the room, The RCF drivers inside the version 1 cabinets were massively over-engineered for the price point. The heavy barium ferrite magnets and cast aluminum frames could take the mechanical abuse of dropped microphones, sudden bursts of high-frequency feedback, and the heavily clipped output of cheap DJ mixers. The heat sinks would get dangerously hot to the touch, but the thermal protection circuits rarely engaged. The American working musician stopped thinking about crossovers, stopped worrying about amplifiers, and simply focused on the performance. The speaker had solved the room. It had conquered the retail shelf. It had freed the American musician from the heavy wooden rack. But the machine that built it was growing too large to rely on specialized Italian acoustic engineering. The corporate pressure to increase margins, expand the catalog, and feed the global retail network was mounting. The speaker had conquered the American stage, but the corporate machine behind it was about to change the rules of the factory. In 2003, the first small crack in the Mackie empire appeared not on a stage, but on a corporate spreadsheet. Mackie Designs had grown rapidly, acquiring other audio brands and reorganizing into a massive parent corporation named Loud Technologies. This restructuring signaled the arrival of two structural forces that routinely damage American audio dominance: the crushing weight of domestic manufacturing costs and the cold logic of corporate consolidation. Building a heavy bi-amplified active speaker, a design requiring two independent amplifiers and precision machine drivers, was fundamentally expensive. The Italian partnership with RCF, which gave to the SRM450 its indestructible acoustic heart, shrank the company's profit margins. Barium ferrite magnets, heavy traditional magnetic structures, that give a speaker driver its raw pushing power, were costly to manufacture and expensive to ship across the Atlantic Ocean. The heavy cast aluminum heat sinks and robust power supplies required to make the speaker survive an American bar gig cut directly into the corporate bottom line. To satisfy the demands of the newly formed corporate machine, the foundational agreement that made the SRM450 an industry standard was severed. Mackie and RCF parted ways. Production of the SRM450 was moved out of Italy and the United States and relocated to offshore factories in China. When the Mackie SRM450 version 2 arrived on American retail shelves, it looked almost identical. The blue-gray asymmetrical plastic cabinet, the composite box that holds the drivers and shapes how the speaker interacts with the air, was physically unchanged. The heavy perforated metal grille was the same. The badge on the front still said Mackie. But inside the cabinet, the engineering philosophy had changed. The overbuilt Italian RCF drivers were replaced with cheaper, mass-produced components. The internal amplifiers were redesigned to cut manufacturing costs. The speaker was suddenly lighter, shedding several pounds of critical mass. For an active, high-output loudspeaker, shedding weight without moving to a radically new amplifier technology is a dangerous engineering compromise. Then the thermal lights began to turn red. In a traditional passive PA system, if a band pushed an external amplifier too hard, the music might clip and distort, or a woofer. The large driver reproducing bass frequencies might physically tear. But the show usually limped on. The original Italian SRM450 had handled extreme abuse by gracefully limiting the audio signal, acting as a dynamic shock absorber. The version 2 reacted differently. It protected its cheaper internal components by completely shutting down. In an American listening scene, this was catastrophic. Picture a mobile DJ at a crowded wedding reception in Ohio in 2007. The dance floor is packed. The music is heavy on bass, pushing the internal amplifiers to their absolute maximum output. The redesigned heatsink on the back of the version 2 cannot dissipate the rising temperature fast enough. A thermal sensor inside the cabinet trips. With no warning, the speaker clicks off. The music stops instantly, the dance floor empties, the trust evaporates. The speaker has successfully saved its own circuitry. but it has completely ruined the performance. This was the fatal paradox of the offshore redesign. A gigging tool is only valuable if it is reliable. The American working musician would rather blow a speaker cone at the end of the night than have a speaker unilaterally quit in the middle of a song. To keep the version 2 running during a demanding 4-hour bar gig in a hot Texas venue, bands resorted to desperate measures. Musicians began carrying small, clip-on oscillating desk fans in their hardware cases. They would clamp these cheap plastic fans directly to their speaker stands, aiming them straight at the rear aluminum heat sinks of the Mackie cabinets just to keep the internal amplifiers from overheating. It was a humiliating visual. A $700 piece of professional audio equipment required a $10 desk fan to survive a standard performance. By 2008, the return piles in the back rooms of Guitar Center and Sam Ash were growing. Salesmen who had once effortlessly recommended the blue plastic box now hesitated. They did not want to deal with angry customers coming back on a Monday morning demanding a refund because their PA system shut down during a critical gig. Direct mail catalogs like Sweetwater Sound still featured the speaker, but online audio forums, a rising digital force where musicians shared real-time gig reports, quickly categorized the speakers into two distinct camps: the reliable Italian ones and the unpredictable Chinese ones. The used market saw a bizarre economic inversion. Heavily scratched 5-year-old version 1 cabinets were selling for more money on Craigslist than brand new version 2 cabinets sitting in sealed boxes. The physical design was still an industry standard, but the American audio market abhors a vacuum of trust, and a rival from California was already preparing a fatal blow. As Mackie fought to manage the thermal shutdown crisis of the version 2 cabinets, a competitor from Costa Mesa, California, recognized the vulnerability. QSC Audio Products had spent decades building the heavy, indestructible power amplifiers that Mackie's active speakers had originally rendered obsolete. Now QSC was ready to reclaim the American stage, and they were armed with a technology that would make the heavy aluminum heat sink look like a relic of the past. In 2009, QSC introduced the K-Series. It was not an asymmetrical blue-gray box. It was a sleek, professional black cabinet with a severe steel grille. But the true threat was the engineering hidden inside. The QSC K12 did not rely on traditional, heavy, heat-generating internal amplifiers. It utilized a Class D amplifier, a highly efficient electrical design that rapidly switches power on and off, producing massive volume with almost zero physical heat. The K12 delivered a staggering 1,000 watts of power. It weighed roughly the same as the Mackie, but most importantly, an American mobile DJ could push a K12 to its absolute limit for 6 hours in a hot, crowded VFW hall, and it would not shut down. The retail shift was immediate, and it was brutal. The sales floor of an American Guitar Center is a meritocracy based on commission and reliability. A professional audio salesman does not want to sell a product that will bounce back to the return desk on a Monday morning with an angry customer demanding a refund. When a working musician walked into a Sam Ash or a local stereo store asking for a powered PA speaker, the dealer no longer pointed to the blue-gray Mackie. They pointed to QSC, or to the aggressively priced lightweight JBL Eon series. The QSC K12 became the new default standard. It was slightly more expensive, but the American working musician gladly paid the premium to guarantee their show would not abruptly end in silence. Mackie attempted to stop the bleeding. The corporate parent company eventually released the version 3 of the SRM450. They redesigned the internal electronics, shifted to a lighter Class D amplifier, and finally solved the thermal shutdown problem. The cabinet was lighter, and the red light stopped ending the gig. But in the American audio market, a broken circuit can be fixed much faster than a broken reputation. The psychological damage to the brand was already irreversible. The working musician has a long, unforgiving memory. They remembered the sudden silence on the dance floor. They remembered the cheap desk fans clipped to the speaker stands. The Mackie SRM450 was no longer the undisputed king of the American gig. It was now just another plastic box in a crowded Sweetwater catalog, forced to compete on price rather than absolute performance. The original acoustic synergy that had made the version 1 a legend, the heavy Italian RCF driver, the massive analog power supply, the indestructible cabinet, had been compromised to satisfy a corporate spreadsheet. Simultaneously, Loud Technologies, the massive parent corporation that owned Mackie, faced severe financial struggles, eventually entering bankruptcy restructuring. The corporate focus shifted away from dominating the live sound market and towards simply surviving the turbulence of the global supply chain. The brand was preserved, but the aggressive engineering culture that had built the original Woodinville speaker was buried under corporate debt. The American live sound ecosystem that the SRM450 had built successfully moved on without it. The Church Sanctuary bought Yamaha active speakers. The touring garage band bought electro voice cabinets. The high-end wedding DJ bought QSC. The familiar blue-gray trapezoid slowly disappeared from the center of the American stage, relegated to the role of a cheap floor monitor, a backup system left in a rehearsal space, or a dusty pair of cabinets sitting in a pawn shop window. The market moved, the catalog changed, the dealers stopped pushing it. The Italian parts were gone. The corporate parent stumbled. The competitors took the shelf. The DJs trusted a black box. The blue plastic faded. The red light killed the legend. The badge lost its weight. The cabinet remained. The trust disappeared. The Mackie brand did not die in the aftermath of the thermal shutdown crisis. It was reorganized, repackaged, and continues to sell audio equipment in massive volume today under new corporate ownership. If you walk into a guitar center or browse the thick pages of a modern Sweetwater catalog, you will still see active plastic PA speakers bearing the Mackie logo, most notably the highly affordable Thump series. But the cultural weight of the brand in the American professional live sound ecosystem has fundamentally changed. The name that once defined the working musician's absolute standard is now largely viewed by the industry as an entry-level consumer product. The touring bands, high-end mobile wedding DJs, and corporate production houses, the very people who built the SRM450 into a nationwide empire, gradually migrated their trust and budgets to QSC, Yamaha, and Electro Voice. Yet the original blue-gray box refuses to disappear from the American gigging landscape. A vibrant, deeply loyal secondary market exists exclusively for the version 1 cabinets. If you search Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, or the dusty corners of local pawn shops in any major American city, you will find working musicians explicitly hunting for the older, heavier models. On professional audio forums like Pro SoundWeb, veteran sound engineers actively advise young bands to ignore new budget speakers and find the old blue boxes instead. They tell them to look for the metal backplate that proudly reads "Made in Italy" or "Assembled in USA." Vintage audio repair technicians frequently find themselves on a repair bench replacing blown capacitors or reconning the 12-inch RCF woofers of 20-year-old Mackie cabinets. They do this because the musicians who own them refuse to throw them away. This preservation effort exists for a highly specific, functional reason. An original, carefully repaired Mackie SRM450 version 1 can still do something that many modern, ultra-lightweight plastic speakers simply cannot. It can push raw, physical, analog sound into a crowded room without relying on aggressive, artificial digital signal processing to choke the bass. The heavy barium ferrite magnet of the Italian woofer, backed by a massive analog power supply and a giant cast aluminum heatsink, possesses a mechanical authority that cheap, modern Class D amplifiers often struggle to replicate. Furthermore, the titanium compression driver, properly time-aligned by the original analog crossover, can throw a vocal clearly to the back of a noisy VFW hall without sounding harsh. The original speaker does not sound like a computer analyzing an audio signal to protect itself. It sounds like a physical instrument moving actual air. It matters because true acoustic synergy cannot simply be simulated by a microchip. The physical geography of that original synergy is now entirely gone. The early Mackie manufacturing headquarters in Woodinville, Washington, where Greg Mackie first envisioned a bi-amplified plastic box that could single-handedly replace a heavy wooden rack of power amplifiers, has drastically changed. The massive assembly lines that once mated heavy Italian acoustic components to American active electronics were silenced long ago. Today, the footprint of that early audio empire is largely absorbed into standard corporate office parks and light industrial warehousing. The town that built the defining sound of the American bar band in the early 2000s no longer manufactures the blue plastic trapezoids. The heavy lifting is now done entirely across the Pacific Ocean, driven by global supply chains rather than local acoustic engineering. But there is a surprising footnote to the American SRM450 story, and it involves the very European company that gave the speaker its original voice. After Mackie and RCF parted ways, due to corporate cost-cutting measures, the Italian acoustic engineering firm did not simply retreat. Realizing that that the American gigging market still craved the heavy, indestructible acoustic performance of the original version 1, RCF eventually entered the United States retail market under its own distinct name. Today, they sell their own highly respected line of active PA speakers directly to American musicians, essentially delivering the uncompromised acoustic philosophy that Mackie abandoned when they moved production offshore. The rise and fall of the Mackie SRM450 reveals a profound truth about how America builds, sells, and ultimately discards its live sound infrastructure. It highlights the brutal gap between what the American working musician truly values, indestructible reliability, analog warmth, and heavy physical engineering, and what the modern corporate audio market actually rewards: lightweight shipping, cheap offshore components, and maximized retail margins. The speaker proved that an American company could perfectly solve the physical burden of live music. But it also proved that once an acoustic tool becomes a massive corporate commodity, the financial spreadsheet will attempt to strip out the exact physical weight that made the product trustworthy in the first place. Yet somewhere in an American dive bar tonight, long after the corporate parent companies have changed hands, the catalogs have rewritten their pages, and the original factory lines have gone dark. A heavily scratched, blue-gray plastic cabinet still sits elevated on a heavy metal tripod stand. Its perforated steel grille is dented. Its plastic shell is scuffed from 1,000 different car trunks. But the power cord is plugged into the wall. A microphone cable runs back to the mixer. The single green light is glowing warmly in the dark, and the heavy Italian woofer is waiting to push the air for one more song. See you in the next video.